Good morning. My name is Emily Gracie. I'm a meteorologist for the National Weather Desk, here to give you a little update on the tropics, which are getting mighty active on this Tuesday morning. So, if you're just waking up and kind of checking in on things, of course, everybody is talking about Idalia. It is now a hurricane. As of early this morning, the hurricane hunters did fly into it. So, I'm going to give you some updates here, show you what's going on, the latest with Idalia, and talk about when we are going to start to see impacts here in the United States. So things are starting to get a little bit strong out there. I'm going to pull up the latest satellite imagery here for you and let you know what's going on. Take a look. This is current satellite imagery, and as you can see, Cuba right here, that western tip of Cuba. Idalia, the winds right now are 80 miles per hour, making it a Category 1 hurricane, strengthened a little bit from that early morning update, 4 a.m. Central Time. They had it right about 75 miles per hour. The NOAA hurricane hunters were in there, and they're now saying it's about 80 miles per hour with some stronger gusts within the center there. So we're not really quite seeing that eye yet here on the infrared satellite imagery, but we're getting closer. We're seeing a lot better shape to this thing. I'm going to pull up the radar so you can see it as well. It is now due north of Cuba by about 100 miles, and it's about 320 miles south southwest of Tampa, Florida. So this is the radar, and it may not look quite as formed here on the radar. And the reason for that is we only have radar over land. So these radar sites like Cuba's and Florida's are picking up on it, but there is a lot of action there on the left side of the storm. You're just not seeing it because we're not picking it up on radar yet. So that's why we use satellite imagery. So here's the latest of it on the radar, and it is certainly strengthening quickly here, and it's going to continue to strengthen over the next 24 hours. In fact, we're actually expecting rapid intensification here as it makes landfall. So we could be talking about a major hurricane going into early tomorrow morning when that landfall does take place. So let's talk about that forecast because it is going to happen here over the next 24 hours. The Hurricane Center came out with their 8 a.m. Eastern update here, 7 a.m. Central, just a short time ago. Not too much as far as major changes. There was that little bit of strengthening. And here's the latest cone. We're still expecting it to be a major hurricane at landfall, and for that to happen sometime early tomorrow morning along Florida's panhandle there. So, if there's any silver lining, it is that there's a lot of wildlife preserves in that area. Unfortunately, also because of the shape of the coastline there, surge is going to be the major concern. So we see these watches, these warnings, and the major concern is going to be that storm surge warning and that hurricane warning. So I want to show you here where the storm surge is going to be the greatest. So as you can see right there in the bend of Florida, we're talking perhaps 8 to 12 feet of water above ground. So that's the concern. That's why the evacuations, Cedar Key, obviously, we've talked about this. It's been an issue in the past, and it's just a spot that's very vulnerable to storm surge, and that's why the evacuation. So the areas in red there, storm surge is going to be between 8 and 12 feet. And then as you get out from that center, now, of course, as that thing makes landfall, the push of water kind of onshore on the right side of it. It's that right front quadrant we always worry about. So the storm surge is going to be an issue there as well. Of course, we've also been talking about this moon, the full moon. That certainly adds into elevated tide. So the high tides are going to play a role depending on when this makes landfall. If we're in a high tide, that's going to be something to think about as well. So as you go down the coastline here, the west coast of Florida, that storm surge really could be an issue all the way down to the Florida Keys, 1 to 3 feet, all the way down to the Homestead area and the Florida Keys. So this is something impacting really a huge chunk of Florida, and then also portions of Georgia and South Carolina, and even northern portions of the east coast of Florida. So storm surge, the biggest concern here. As always, water is the most dangerous part of these storms. So as you see with the track, and I want to make a couple notes here with this track because a couple of issues come with that long-term forecast as well and that forward movement. So we are expecting that landfall sometime early tomorrow as a major hurricane, weakening as it moves onshore, but dumping rain on northern Florida and Georgia. So flash flooding a concern, of course, as well. And then there are these tropical storm watches and warnings as well for the east coast of Florida up through Georgia and into South Carolina. So we're talking tropical storm conditions, also a possibility here going into the day tomorrow and tomorrow night for portions of South Carolina's coastline. Once again, like I said, that water is going to be the biggest concern. We talked about the storm surge, but the rain just adds on top of that. So here's rainfall impacts that we can expect in those areas where landfall is going to happen. It could be upwards of 6 to 10 inches. Isolated areas could see even more. And then as it moves inland, it will continue to dump water. So inland flooding a concern as well, especially those urban areas that do not drain very well. So going up through northern Florida into Georgia, Savannah, Augusta even could be dealing with some flash flooding, and then all the way up through Columbia, Florence, South Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina. These are spots that could see isolated areas more than 5 to 10 inches. So it's all about that forward movement, how quickly it moves, and how quickly we see this move out here, which brings me to my next point. I want to pull up some forecast models here. This is a GFS forecast model, and I want to point out what the long-term track here might be on Idalia, because we're talking, it's not going away right away. So while the immediate concern is that rapid intensification right before landfall, category 3, possibly 4, as it makes landfall right there in that panhandle of Florida, right there in that bend, where all that water is going to just get shoved on shore. So that is happening sometime early tomorrow. This is about 7, 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, and then through the day tomorrow moving inland, and by the afternoon, it should actually be moving up through South Carolina through the afternoon and evening. So expect those impacts in through Georgia, South Carolina late tomorrow into early Thursday. And then really a lot of the impacts from this is going to be north of the storm. So if you're in Georgia and South Carolina, once that remnant low or tropical storm at that point moves north of you, you're good. Things are going to clear out pretty quickly. So the backside of it should be relatively dry. But watch what happens. This is going into late Thursday and early Friday. It will weaken, but it's not going to go too far. In fact, it looks like it could just linger off the coastline here, which means coastal impacts are going to continue for places like North Carolina, South Carolina, the east coast of Florida, Georgia. These could continue all the way through the end of the weekend into the holiday weekend. So this is something to bear in mind for folks headed to any of these beaches this weekend, is that these coastal impacts, rip currents are going to be a concern. The surf is going to be dangerous. So bear this in mind as that low just kind of hangs out off the coast. And then now, don't put much faith in long-term computer models, but by the end of the weekend and into Labor Day, this thing is still kind of hanging out as a remnant low off the coast. Not much movement here with it. In fact, it could bring more rain to Florida by early next week. So that's something we're watching as well as a possibility. So I want to bring you back here to kind of the latest on Idalia. Like I said, it's a category 1 hurricane right now. Winds are 80 miles per hour. It is expected to make landfall in the panhandle of Florida. Hurricane warnings are in place in those areas shaded in red. If you are under a hurricane warning or a storm surge warning, that's as bad as it gets. You do need to evacuate. So areas around Cedar Key are going to be greatly at risk. I want to go through these key messages from the Hurricane Center because they do a great job with this. It doesn't look like they've updated it for the 7 a.m. update, but these are going to still hold true that some areas in the Big Bend, Florida are going to get anywhere from 8 to 12 feet of storm surge. So that's incredibly life-threatening storm surge. Hurricane force winds are going to be possible. In fact, they're going to be likely in those areas under hurricane warnings. That means winds sustained over 74 miles per hour with gusts higher, especially right where it does make that landfall. And then heavy rainfall could cause some flash flooding as well. So that's going to be another concern. So flooding is going to be ongoing here as we go through the next several days. So we'll have updates as the day goes on. My colleague Matt Ritter is going to be hopping on here in a few hours. We'll get an update at about 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So we will bring you the latest on that. We are expecting that rapid intensification. And as the hurricane hunters continue to fly into this, we're also going to get updates kind of between these bigger full updates from the Hurricane Center. So watch for that. You can follow us on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook. We'll continue to bring the latest here on Idalia and, of course, Franklin out there, which fortunately, even though it's a major hurricane, it's Category 4, is not causing any major impacts, some coastal impacts, and some tropical storm issue conditions for Bermuda, but nothing for the East Coast. So all eyes on Idalia. Will continue